for having no three sides. Like, it's not impressive. He's just doing what like his nature is doing. Like,
Okay. Yeah, that's all I was, I guess, going to ask. So
that's what the original, the topic before that was the topic behind it.
Yeah, so to address that, like, I don't know that, having a nature, whether God gives you the nature, the ability as a prophet to achieve something, or you have it by default because you are God or something, really has any bearing on the fact that it's a legal matter. And the legal matter is like, okay, through Adam, all humans fall and fail. And through one man, Christ, all humans rise. And so when like atheists say he just lost a weekend, or it's not really impressive to me because he, like you said, a square it's a square. And so it's like, okay, cool, you're a square, no big deal. It would be a bigger deal if all of a sudden a square shaved off its edges and became a circle, right? So that's not really I think this is a problem with a lot of the apologists out there, is they're not really explaining what it is that Jesus' atonement actually did. Because
I wasn't necessarily referring to atonement. I'm just talking about his sinlessness. Like, right, okay, Jesus can't sin, so his like choices are just like mild or wildly less valuable than my choices to not sin.
Well, no, what it is so if you have the two natures, you have one logically that would be competing. In John 17, he, hey, take this away from me, if it be your will. And so he submits his will to that of the Father. And so it's showing a submissiveness inside of Jesus having those two wills, or two, not wills, natures. And so I hear what you're saying. It's not very interesting to you, but it's interesting because of the fact that the atonement hinges upon the sinlessness. In light of Deuteronomy 32, verse 33 that I just read, he who sins against me, I will blot out. So through Jesus not sinning, humanity is no longer blotted out.
No. I'm saying the sinlessness isn't impressive because he can't sin. Like, just like
do
the
you mean
triangle
that
can't.
Jesus doesn't have the ability to sin?
Yeah,
Because
it's not that he can't. Yeah.
One might want to think, okay, Jesus does have the ability to sin, but he still can't sin. And this is like a deeper discussion in philosophy of ability, where some people think that some's ability supersedes possibility. So someone might have the ability to do something even if it isn't metaphysically possible per se, or even logically possible. That's one way you can go about that issue.
Wait, you're saying he could sin, but he also couldn't sin?
Sin, okay, could is used in two different ways here. There's a sense in which he couldn't sin, and that's cashed out in terms of possible worlds for me. There's no world where Jesus actually commits a sin because he's a perfect being in some way.
Right.
In another sense, we're using it in terms of ability. We're saying that, okay, he has the ability to sin, although it's not actually exercised in any possible world. And some people in the philosophy of ability take this approach where something actually doesn't have to be possible for you to have the ability to do it. And this is one of the cases where you might say that that's occurring.
Okay.
I'm having troubles happening with that because I want to say having the ability to do something means it's possible in some world. But in the literature, you're saying, or when it comes to the people who handle this with rigor, they're cashing it out as you can have the ability to do something and it not be possible in any world.
Yeah. There's multiple positions on it. There's one, like you are saying, that cashes out ability in terms of the possible worlds, but there's people who find that inadequate. Another case you might find it inadequate is God creating the best possible world. You might want to say that God has other options to create that are not the best worlds, although in no world does God actually create these worst worlds, because God will always create the best possible world. That's another situation where you might want to say ability supersedes possibility. So like there's multiple views on it. I'm just giving one that's more compatible with things like
Courtney. The thing is, ability just becomes like an opaque concept because it's unclear in what way other than possible worlds is that being cashed out.
I actually don't think the common sense understanding of what ability is cashed out in terms of possible worlds.
Yeah, that might be true. Actually, it's likely true.
I still don't think it's opaque. I mean, the possible world understanding might even be more opaque for me.
I'm not sure about the folk semantics, but that's just how I would think most people in academic philosophy use the word ability.
Do you think if I just look up ability on the SCP, I could maybe like get a little more on this?
Yeah, you can probably search up ability powers. They probably have a lot of stuff.
Yeah. At first, I was a little confused on what you were talking about, and then you said something. I was like, "Oh, this sounds like stuff I've heard before." So I'm just gonna make sure I understand it.
I think he did a really good job at explaining it. What is your position then in light of the question? I'm sorry, was it normative that asked? Did you?
About the powers thing? No, that wasn't me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know who that was then. Well, anyways, do you remember, Jambar, what the question was? I didn't.
Oh, I don't exactly remember what the question. I was just commenting on okay, they wanted to say something like Jesus isn't a morally virtuous person or something because he doesn't actually have the ability to choose any evil thing. But I mean, in this case, you can say that because he still has some power, and you can cash out moral, choosing the right things in terms of Jesus's ability or power rather than possible.
But they don't want to say that God could, they say Jesus is God and God could sin. So I don't think they want to say that.
Well, no, because the second nature comes into play here. That's why I think that's important in light of what Jambar said.
I don't know. Maybe Julian, is that a contradiction? Because he's fully God and then fully human.
No, because to have it a contradiction, you'd have to have it in the same exact sense. So one sense, for example, if in one nature he had two natures, then that would be a contradiction. But he doesn't have two natures, one fully God, one man.
But they're talking about the same person, though.
But you realize there is a sense in which you can say what you want there, and you can say that God couldn't sin. You can say that in the possible world sense, in that in every single world, God actually doesn't sin. But you can say something stronger although God couldn't sin, he still has the ability to sin. It's just not going to be exercised in any state of affairs. So you can say that.
Wait, who could say that? Courtney?
Well, anyone who
generally
has a view on powers, abilities, and
any
the royal you.
Okay, I think I get it. I mean, so is that the route that Courtney or J-Rob is taking?
I mean,
right.
It's get from what they were talking about, but I don't know their views in particular.
No, I mean, that's the route that I would take. That's what I'm saying. I think he did a good job at explaining it in light, but I can't remember the question. I thought it was normative. I'm trying to remember exactly how he phrased it, because when Jambar came up, I was driving and I'm sitting waiting to pick up my kids. So I'm trying to remember if anybody could jog my memory on exactly what was said right before Jambar spoke, then I think that would help us circle back.
I was speaking before that, and I was just saying it's not really impressive that God, because to my knowledge, it was the view that, or typical Christians will say that God just doesn't, there's no possible world where God could ever sin.
Right, which is why Jambar came up and said it doesn't negate that one could have the ability, but just that one didn't.
I think what you're trying to say, Trey, would still work even given Jambar's explanation.
Right.
I think you're saying, you want to say in the sense of him making that some actuality on a world is the reason you'd be better than him, because you risk some measure of instantiating some sin or something, whereas he just doesn't have that. In the sense you want to say that we're better than him because we can instantiate.
Are they saying he does have the ability? Is that what they're saying?
It's so weird. I get what he's saying. Sin is something that he has the ability to do. They're just saying what they want to say is there's no world or possible world where that is the case, or it instantiates that Jesus commits a sin. But
so they're saying,
I get it, but I don't. It's a new
saying
concept.
He does have the ability. It's just the case he doesn't use that ability.
Right. So you can think about it in this case, right? Imagine you have a gun and the gun is loaded. And you might think, okay, people's character, is good enough that in every possible world, no one actually fires this gun. And you might want to say, okay, even though nobody actually fires this gun, the gun still has the power to shoot.
To shoot, yeah. Okay,
That's another sense you might think. It's not just the ability of like human beings. It might be the ability of other material objects that you could say, okay.
Yeah, like the pew pew has the power to do damage, but it doesn't in any of the
in
worlds.
every possible world. But okay, so
Right.
all right, yeah. So they do think that God has the ability to sin.
Right. It's just not exercised ever because he's a perfect being.
Okay. Well, okay, so he's a perfect being, so he would never exercise the action of sin.
Right.
Yeah,
But see, in Hebrew, in the book of Hebrews, it says that he was tested in every way. So that, again, would go back to the fact that I hear this all the time when people say, well, like, if Jesus is God, then he's not like in every way like me. And I'm like, it doesn't say that he has to be in every way like you. He was just tested as humans are tested. Like, he walked on earth, he was scorched by the sun, he stubbed his toe, he, got hungry, he defecated, he came through his mother's womb, he breastfed, he did all of the things that are very humiliating, he flatulated, like all of these things, plus the fact that he was around beautiful women, plus the fact that he could have, said middle finger to the air to the leaders of the time, but he doesn't. And so that's what makes there to be that meaningful distinction. Dion, if you want me to...
What explains why he doesn't is because he's perfect, right?
I would say having a divine nature in light of, like, again, having the two natures helps to bring that, to manifest that. But again, we see that in John 17, he says, not my will, but your will. That is the human nature coming into alignment with the divine status. Like, he's basically saying, okay, fine. I know theoretically I really don't want to have to go through this. This is going to totally suck for me, but not my will, your will.
I guess that is what I'm getting at. Like, Jesus has like a help that no one else like. I don't have a perfect nature, so like, so the fact that he has this nature, and that's or do you agree that is what explains why he doesn't sin or choose to sin?
That would play the explanatory role, right?
I think it's against his nature. It's like asking if God can create a rock that he cannot lift.
No, they're saying that he does have the ability. That would get rid of the ability.
Wait, this is really dumb, and shoot this down really quick. Like, is it the conception? Like, I don't know if Christians have this conception, but is it that like perfect beings, like, because I want to say with the ability thing, I want to say perfect beings don't have the ability to sin, but would that be inconsistent? Like, could they drum it up to where a perfect being, they could just say that, what Jambar just said. A perfect being is one that has the ability to do evil, just never does it or something.
Yeah, because then what explains why they don't? Like, if a perfect being could sin, then what explains why it doesn't?
The will. That's why I'm harping on the fact that he says, not my will, but your will. He is aligning.
Why would the will of a perfect being be one that is consistent with one that doesn't instantiate sin or something? Or like, why? Like,
I don't know why we're adding in the word perfect being in light of the fact that he has either a divine nature or...
That's why you want to say he doesn't instantiate any, like, in the possible worlds, why none of those contain him actually doing sin is because he's perfect, right?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know that it necessitates that. That's what I'm saying. Go ahead.
I mean, a lot of theists want to say that God wills only the good states of affairs. He only wants good things. So whether or not you're using the language in terms of God's will or God's perfection, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference between the worlds that are instantiated.
Well, why would you? Well,
because, I'll give you an example. There are divine figures in the Hebrew Bible. They are literally divine. They're called B'nai Elohim. They're called sons of God. They themselves, technically, by definition, sinned. They actually come down in the Hebrew Bible and teach humans how to sin. So here, in their, I guess, parameters, God didn't necessarily give them the Torah, the commands, And so by definition, they didn't sin, but they definitely went against the will of God. So what you see in Jesus is this will submitting to God rather than
Wait,
going.
wouldn't going against the will of God mean it's a sin? I'm confused.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. But okay, so in the Hebrew Bible, sin is defined as accordance with the 613, which is called the Torah. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so if you say like done in faith is sin, because the Hebrew Bible is very clear that you can do all the things written in the law, but not have faith in God, and you're still sinning.
Right.
So the point that I'm getting at is if you have angels that go against God's will, then they are by definition sinning in one sense, but there is no Torah, there is no law above them that God gave them. God never gives them a law and says, here's the laws for you to follow. We don't have anything in the Hebrew Bible that says that. So I guess what I'm saying is divine creatures can themselves sin. But what makes it interesting is that if a divine creature does not sin and he submits his will to God, then I think that's what you're seeing in John 17.
Divine creatures, then under this lens, divine creatures wouldn't be like God in one sense, because God would never act out of accordance with his own will. And these divine
That's
beings
not
acting out of
necessarily
accordance.
so.
Wait,
Well, that's
sorry.
what I'm getting at. Okay. Let me explain what I'm getting at here. You say God would not necessarily act outside of his will. Okay, so there are divine prerogatives that God himself has that he doesn't expect us to exercise. For example, when he says, the sins of the father shall not be visited on the sons, right? Each man shall die for their own sin. However, we find in the Hebrew Bible that God takes the child of David born to Bathsheba because of what David had did. It was like Chilu Hashem, which is like desecration of the name of God. And so God unalives this child, but he tells you, you're not allowed to unalive the child of the father that sinned, but I can. And so this goes into the idea and the mindset that God is the origin of all life. The Father and the soul are his. And so when you say God would not, quote, break his own Torah, God stands outside the Torah. He's not in it. So in some ways, yes. In other ways, no. The only time God, quote, doesn't break his Torah is when he binds himself with a promise using his own name. When he says something to the effect of, I swear by, and he gives his name, which is no name higher, so the name of Hashem, or Yod Heh. He says, I swear by that name, I will not do this, 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 or I will do this, this, this. So in that way, God wouldn't break it. But in other ways, yes, he's above the
Yeah,
Torah and he can actually
like
do
the
that.
promise to Noah.
Yes, exactly. The promise to Noah.
Okay, yeah, but okay. I mean, there's a couple ways of reading what you said, but I just wanted to force the main point here is that, okay, the main dispute we were getting at is whether God's perfection implies that in any possible world, God does no wrong, and I think it does. And you brought up one case in which creatures labeled as quote unquote divine were going against God's will, which is equivalent to sinning. Even though these creatures were labeled as divine, there's something that's lacking in them that's not lacking in God, i.e., God is all good. So just saying that there's some divine beings that go against God's will doesn't imply that God would ever go against his own will. It actually seems like under your reading, God's will is something that our moral laws are something that God determines via his desires or his actions or something. And of course, God is going to follow his actions and desires in that way.
You're talking about angelic creatures?
Well, she was
They're
talking.
created, but
I think the word divine is misused here, but I might be wrong. But I think
I mean, he's just
more
using
better
Courtney's
term is
semantics.
angelic creature.
I was just quoting
Creatures.
what was said. So I
yeah,
didn't.
I said divine because of it could be like angelic, or it could be like the council surrounding. Like you could
It's
even say
fine.
divine, like the
It's fine.
the cherubim, and I'm trying not to use so much Hebrew because I don't know. I have to just say it in English anyway. So the cherubim, and things like that.
I mean,
They're not necessarily angels, but
divine is fine for this conversation, though, right?
Yeah, he's a native Hebrew speaker, so he's trying to make sure that he's understanding in light of what he knows of Tanakh, or I mean of
Yeah,
Hebrew
the
Bible.
divine, it's more like in Hebrew, it's like Elohi. It's like a godly.
Elohai?
No, it's like godly.
When you said Elohi though, or
El,
Elohai,
Elohi,
uh,
like it's a godly thing.
God of.
Godly,
Okay.
I think. Hope I'm not mistaken. Also, I wanted to extend on the word leolam when he quoted the term, and you were right. When we say leolam, it sometimes can be used like forever, and sometimes can be used for a long period of time. When we want to use eternity, we usually use the word netzach.
Yeah.
What?
What do you think about Kadim? As far east as one goes, Kadim.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
I'm
I don't
not
know how
sure
to spell
about.
it in Hebrew. It's in Deuteronomy. It's of Hashem. Hashem is considered Kadim, as far east as one can go, because in Hebrew you write from right to left instead of left to right. So Hashem is considered Kadim, as far east as you could go, meaning the very beginning, the head,
Yeah,
like the Rosh.
I'll have to look it up. No, don't
I don't.
remember
I
exactly.
don't know how to spell. I don't know how to spell it in Hebrew.
No, it's fine. I might also not be familiar with it.
Let me see. I think
Anyways,
it's
Jambar.
Kadim. I think that's it. That's like translate. I could be wrong. Or Kadim. I forget the vowels. So I guess what I'm saying is that the meaningful distinction is that when a divine one or an angelic one, but I don't really want to say angelic one in light of Jesus, I want to say something like a divine, submits his will to God, then that brings it into alignment. And so what do you then say, Jambar, in light of the host, Trey, saying you're probably better than Jesus because Trey, doesn't have that divine status to help him? What do you say to that?
Oh well, I think the background's kind of like a joke, but I mean it's probably false under the reading I'm taking, but I get where the motivation comes from. Under certain views in philosophy of ability, and it's actually going to follow that somehow you might be better than Jesus because he would sort of be acting like a robot if you didn't have other conditions at
Yeah,
play.
but better in
Yeah,
what
that's what
way?
I was getting at pretty much.
That's funny because that's what I just recently had a debate with a Unitarian, and I said, you essentially have a Jesus that's a robot. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, but of course you see why the reading is you probably wouldn't want to say Jesus or God acts that way, that they're deterministic.
No, yeah, I wouldn't say that, but that's why I think it's so important because John 17, he does, like, a robot wouldn't say, no, I don't want to do this. I mean, unless he was programmed, right? If we're doing like hard determinism here, like unless he was programmed to say, no, I don't want to say at that specific time, to then say, no, not my will, but yours. So no, I don't think I would say like robot in such. I mean, I get the motivation as well. I just don't know that I would agree
Yeah, but the
that.
robot doesn't have a will, no matter how AI you will insert it. It doesn't have an actual will.
Yeah, I mean I think that's what it comes down to. So I don't know if that is that a problem for Trey.
Well, I have a
One
question
person,
too.
two wills.
Yeah, well, like, what's the problem with God creating a world where people with imperfect will never choose to do the bad?
Yeah.
Wait, are you saying what's the problem with God creating a world where imperfect people never choose the bad?
Yeah, we're saying like Jesus has the ability, like the pew pew with the bullet in it that nobody ever fires. Jesus has the
Yeah.
ability to do bad, but he has a perfectly efficacious will or whatever, so he
Because
doesn't. It just
because
so
then he
happens
would.
to be sorry. It just so happens to be that in no possible world he'll
But
choose the bad. What is stopping God from creating a bunch of people with very imperfect will, also never choosing the bad?
because then you don't have free choice. How do you say
What's
it?
what's to stop God from creating a bunch of people with imperfect will
They
that
just did it.
always freely choose to do the good?
I
Because
mean,
then
there's
you.
nothing. I don't think there's anything philosophically that it's going to stop God from doing that. But I just don't think when we look.
You probably
Huh?
want to say there is. Probably want to say there is.
Okay, but why though?
You probably okay. I mean, the reasons are spooky, and I don't really do philosophy of religion, but sometimes people appeal to lines like, we are not really that aware of things that are metaphysically possible out there. We have some notion that, okay, well, if we can conceive of it, that's some evidence that it's metaphysically possible, but we don't really know for sure. Now, if you want to say that God can, create a world in which everyone chooses to do the right things all the time, God obviously should have created that world. But I don't think you want to say that. I think you want to say that there's some conditions on metaphysical possibility that are out there that restrict God in a way from creating this world. And the problem is, concerning to both groups, is that we're not immediately aware of what sort of restrictions are going on that stop God from creating this world. We just have to kind of say they exist.
Also, you
Well-
cannot have true love without free choice.
I mean, that's just going to be a claim. But what I'm more interested in is like, yeah. So, I can just bring it up from an evidentiary problem, like J. Rob and I were talking about last night. Like, what's to stop? Like, I don't know. It just seems like there's some arbitrary like threshold of suffering that is
Hey,
going to
wait,
exist.
real quick, I want to ask Jambar a question. Wouldn't it be kind of like a contradiction to say God can make imperfect, like moral agents, but also have them be perfect? Like for them to always choose the good, that would mean that they would have to be perfect moral agents.
I think the idea more is that it's possible to create humans that always choose to do the right thing. I don't think you have to use the imperfect, perfect language to get the problem out there.
I don't know that you can though, because in light of like free choice, okay, each person always chooses the good. But then we're like a bunch of organisms bumping into other organisms. At some point in time, even if you're quote always choosing the good, you're gonna like involve yourself in and around another person that's gonna be antithetical to their will, right? And so even if
Sorry, go ahead.
so like for example, like a woman on her menstrual cycle, like while that's not considered a sin, it's considered like impurity. So she is like impure, and so let's say a man, let's say she touches something, she sits on something and she bleeds through, and then someone else touches that. So you're spreading impurity. And so even if you're not doing the bad things, there's still like this holy status that God looks and says, I require this holiness. I require this holy status. And so just by the nature of being humans, that's impossible. So I don't know.
So are you saying like this? This is sorry. This is going to sound silly, but are you saying like if Jesus was a woman, he would not have lived without sin because he would have menstruated?
No. Jesus came through his mother's womb. By definition, he would have impurity on him, which is why his mother goes to the temple when she names him and everything. She goes to the temple and she brings her offering.
Really quick, that's not what I asked.
Yeah, but it's not a sin. So that's what she said. It's not
Yeah,
a sin.
Okay, well, I'm saying, well, then I don't understand why to bring it up. I'm saying, can God create a world where people weigh the options? They say, I can have a slice of mango, or I can, punch a baby, and they always choose the mango.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is like the mango. Okay, what if the mango is like picked just out of necessity because of the way the world is, because of people's. I'm saying all good decisions will still somehow lead to a bad outcome in some shape or form.
I appreciate like your ferocity, but I'm just stipulating that that's not the case and asking what's the problem with that not being the case.
I'm saying I don't know how to fathom that. Like I'm trying to. I'm literally like, okay.
Maybe understand it in terms of like an argument from